who are we? CCLA difference what? Difference makers.
Wow. Where do I begin? Well, funny thing is I was an 8th grade teacher, moved down to elementary school involuntarily to kindergarten, then went back up to junior high. And then when there was an opening in 1st grade, I said, I'm taking it. And I lived there for a little while before I became a resource teacher, coach, induction stuff, all those good things that a very small school district does. So I have multiple hats. So thank you all for being here today and for entertaining me who, by the way, I am an introvert. And what I just had to do was a whole lot. So thank you for bearing with me. So when I start to sweat bullets in a little bit, just know that I'm just coming down a little bit. So thank you all for being here today. And so today, as we go into our learning, we are going to walk away with 3 things. We want to be able to look at the reflect on the process you have in place to identify an area of focus that's linked to data. Everything that we talk about today is going to be based in that. We also are going to reflect on how to use data-driven inquiries to guide an area of focus. So once you've decided on your area of focus, or once the data tells you what your area of focus is, how are we going to use this data to drive that? And you will walk out with some tools for gathering and analyzing the data so that you'll be able to have something to say when you go back to your site and work with your teachers and work with your colleagues. You have something that you're going to be able to walk out with tangibly to implement today. Our sessions norms, we know it's a Friday. It's a half day. You may be close or far from home, but we ask that you stay engaged as much as possible with our content today. Speak your truth. This is your safe place, kind of like Vegas here. Whatever you say will stay in the room, but the learning, take it with you and apply it and transfer that to others. You might experience some discomfort as you reflect on some of your practices, and that's okay. We're not here to, this is not an I gotcha moment. We're not here to say you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong. We're just here to enhance the practices you have in place. So if it's a little uncomfortable at times, that's okay. We don't have all the answers, so you can expect and accept that we have non-closure. We may have to walk out with some unanswered questions, but if you pose a question and you come up with a question later, go ahead and shoot us an email. You'll have our contact information. I think we have on the last slide so that you can reach out with any questions, and we will allow for those organic conversations as we're going through this process. It's all about what we're doing here in our place of learning. It's not about trying to get through this content, but what are we going to take away from this today? Familiar with accelerated learning, which I'm assuming you are here for that reason. So accelerated learning is really based on learning strategies that are designed to meet the students or the pupils, the children, where they are in their learning trajectory. All of this is based on this evidence-based practice that's going to allow us to accelerate our students along so that they can gain mastery in their skill set, so that they can continue without the large gaps that they may have in place, or we begin to bridge those together. This is done through individual or small group instruction, and we want to make sure that all the evidence-based strategies we're using are there to be just in time to scaffolds and differentiation so that we can meet them where they are. It's not we're just going to do this because it should be done, or maybe they need this. This is all going to be based on this is what they need at this time. So just keep those in mind as we go through today, because learning acceleration, it's not about remediation. We need to look at learning acceleration through this lens, that we have high expectations for all of our students, all students, no matter what. Students that have an IEP, students that may be struggling, students that have outside factors that are influencing their learning, we need to understand that they all have the ability to learn. And in essence, we really want to provide that just-in-time support. And we have here support that's based on student data, because that's our focus for today. We can't just walk into a classroom and say, we're going to try this with the students and see how they do with it. If they don't need it, you're wasting your time and you're wasting their time. And we want to make sure that we keep moving them forward. Learning acceleration is based on grade level learning goals. It's not trying to give them stuff from 2nd grade or 3rd grade. They may need some of those skills, but you're going to do that using your content, your current content areas. You're going to be able to bridge those gaps for them, building those skills, using evidence-based strategies, but using your grade level content. We want to stay away from the remediation where we have those low expectations for all students. And I talked about that just in case support where I'm going to try this to see if they need it. And it's like the guessing game. And we don't want to play the guessing game, because we are tasked with their future. And if we are just going to play the guessing game, we're going to have to also guess where they're going to be in the future. Just in case support is just an attempt to reteach skills. They may or may not need it. And it's usually just past skills that they should have had in the last grade. Maybe they need a little bit of it or they need a little bit of a review, but you spend your time drilling and isolating that skill, and that's not going to help them move forward. And it's not typically related to their grade level. It's past work, past grades that you're trying to fill the gap with. So we really want to live in this learning acceleration so that we can give them just-in-time support, but all of that is going to be based on student data. And as we get into our next technology, okay, we are really going to learn how to accelerate learning and focusing on the priority content areas. So how do we choose what we're going to focus on, what's the content we're going to focus on, and we're going to walk you through how we're going to take data and bring that down to the focus. My partner in crime here is going to talk about how we do that.
All right, thank you, Veronica. Welcome, everyone, again. Now let's jump into some actionable steps. What you're going to see today is two parts. I'm going to take you through some of our evidence that we have from one of our sites, which is a TK8 district, drilling down all the way to an individual coach and classroom where we pulled data from. So we're going to be using some terminology that may feel uncomfortable until we get to the next space where Veronica will then take us even deeper into our understanding of the different layers of data, okay? So Edwards Deming stated that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. We bring that in because just like Veronica mentioned, we can't jump into our classroom, we can't jump into our strategies, into the work without knowing where our students are. And we do that through data mining, right? And so the example that we're using today is what we're going to call Classroom ABC. Okay, and it comes from a TK8 school district, one school. It has 384 students. 57% of them are English learners, and 84% are low socioeconomic or economically disadvantaged. 48 students with disabilities at that 12%, and 49 of the students are migrants. And then our ethnicity is Hispanic, 92%, and white is 4.43. So that is the breakdown, the demographics of the district, one district that we work with in our CCLA networking that we have in our valley. So let's take a look at what is probably familiar to you, and we're going to call this data large grain data. This is data from CASP. So take a moment. When we look at data, we want to notice, wonder, and start to think about implications for instruction. This is for mathematics. You have your 3 sections, your concepts and procedures claim, your problem solving and modeling claim, and the communicating and reasoning claim. What do you notice, think, wonder around this data? Oh, and disclaimer, the slide deck on SCED will be slightly different than what we have here. We made some changes. All right, with your group, just have a discussion. What do you see, think, or wonder with this data that you have in front of you known as large grain data? So this is exceeded, yes, exceeded, met, nearly met, not met, okay? And then percentage below standard, percentage near standard, and the light blue is percentage above standard. Thank you for asking that clarifying question. What do you see, think, wonder? Is this data familiar to us, right? Do we analyze this data with our teams? So can I ask you, which one are they, out of these domains, which one are they more successful in, just by quick image? Communicating, reasoning. Okay. We want to remember, as we're looking at data at any time, we should have a data protocol process, right? To have us start questioning, looking for implications for instruction, and really trying our best to remove our immediate go-to, where we begin to have discussions like, well, it's those kids, right? It's the students that go to the resource teacher. We want to make sure that we hold off on thoughts and comments like that, because what we're looking at in our protocol is just making sure we're looking at the data, right? And the implications for instruction. So as we process this through them, some things came up. We also then looked at, we're going to talk about what came up out of our discussions, but we also analyzed and looked through our LPAC data for this site. What do we see, think, wonder around our large grain data? How many students, what percentage are proficient? The 10%, right? We have our 4 domains off to the left-hand side, be the right-hand side for you. We have our listening domain, speaking, reading, and writing. For this particular group of students, our listening domain is where they are strongest. In looking at need or implications for instruction, you can see that we may need additional work within the reading domain. But we want to mine that even more, right? Why is listening, why did they do better in the listening domain versus the reading domain? So as we mined through the data, we had great conversations. We came up with some data points. We know that our English learners scored significantly lower in mathematics than all students. We also noticed that LPAC score showed 10.13% in proficiency for this group of students. Take a moment at your table, or if you want to just do it internally in your alone zone, what potential supports or next steps, if any, would you propose for classroom A, B, C? What are some next steps? What do you think? Classroom or school? All right. Any thoughts? What are some potential next steps? Either implications for the single school district or even drilling down all the way to the classroom. What are some potential next steps? Did we come up here? Or Karen, go ahead at any time. That's okay. Consider math materials in home language. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Zoomies. Anyone here in person? Any implications or potential supports? Next steps? Okay, so that mathematical language, excellent. Slight plug, we have next session around mathematical language if you'd like to join us. All right, so what we did as a team, as you mentioned, we talked about then this district, school, and classrooms need additional math language routines. And we looked into evidence-based strategies to bring that in through talk moves and things like that. We did a PDSA cycle And then we said, you know what? We have additional resources to bring to our students through the LPAC interim assessments via CASP, right? Get exposure to them. And we really lived in conversations around the strategies. But remember, this is that large grain data, right? It doesn't say much about the individual who's sitting here. It doesn't say much about the classroom down the hall. So we said, let's dig a little bit deeper and let's funnel in and take a look. But before we do, is there any additional information that we could start to mine out? And what are some next steps that you might do now that we've done that large grain data? What is additional information that you would now go and seek? Talk in your groups around what additional information do you need around their successes and challenges, and what else can you gather? Turn and talk and be ready to share. All right, does anyone want to share what else could they go and gather to analyze? I heard something at this table over here, additional information that you could go gather. Not it.
Across classrooms at certain grade levels, just to dig a little bit deeper to see what was going on.
I'll recap the best I can. Thank you. That was a wonderful answer. To go down now to the classroom level and identify and go through diagnostics, right? Their beginning, middle, end of year diagnostics. Excellent. Thank you so much. That leads us to our next slide. Our next set of data then, now if you think of us funneling down, right, is medium-sized grain data. And so what we looked at is we analyzed previous professional development. We went and looked at the interim assessment scores, looking at those student scores, the district assessments, exactly what was just said, with looking at beginning of the year, middle of the year, any diagnostics. Maybe they're using iReady, maybe they're using a different tool. But we took and we drilled that down and just analyzed that information. And we begin to see a slight change from that initial need, right? We initially said we need to look at evidence-based strategies. And as we drilled down into the medium grain size data, what popped up was these successes and challenges that the site was seeing. It was that teachers have been previously supported with mathematical language routines. We've had some success in it, especially school-wide. We use the strategy, the 3 reads. And then the teachers had training on the LPAC test types. But we found some challenges still in that data. And it's that the students were not progressing in their scores. That disaggregated data, that further deeper data, was not available or readily available to the teachers to look at, analyze, and identify implications for instruction. The interims were not being used, though the training had gone and been put in place. And we found that teachers were struggling with the understanding of those individual math claims that the students are assessed on at the in the summative test on CAS at the end of the year. And that the LPAC interim assessments were not being used at all. There was not enough exposure for our students with the interims for the LPAC. So we came up with these 2 sections that they scored significantly lower than all students. and that they weren't progressing in their scores through those district interim assessments, so we're still not seeing progress. The LPAC interims were not being used. So at this point, if you were at this classroom, what do you think now are those potential next steps for this site? So turn in your groups or Zoomies, put it in the chat. And so now with this additional data, what would you propose as the next steps for this site? That's where it's going to come in. Give you about 30 more seconds. All right, do I have any brave volunteer? Any online? We do have some online. So additional professional development, specifically around data analysis and, you'll keep hearing me say it, the implications for instruction, because that's usually where we stop. We're good at looking at data. We're good at analyzing it and saying what the colors are and where the students are. But usually that's where that red line then cuts us off. And then our teachers head back to their classrooms. And then we don't touch the data again. It came up in a staff meeting for 20 minutes and we move on. The implications for instruction is the question we should continually keep in our mind and in our data protocol. Anything else, Karen? Or anybody in the room want to share out? I heard at this table exposure to the LPAC. So actually get in and get that exposure done. I heard you sharing an example. Can I give you the mic and you share that exposure example?
I'm the ELD coordinator at my school and also a fourth grade teacher. So we're taking the LPAC practice test, and I'm gathering all the fourth grade kids at the same time. And we're just talking about the tools and like the process of how do we tackle a problem. Like it's not even necessarily about what Jenny says, it's not really the questions, what are they asking you, but like just the process of trying to figure out and like expose them to things before. So it's not so scary when they see it for the very first time.
Thank you so much. So it's incredibly important for that exposure. It's just like text structure, and we know part of our ELD standards is exposure to different text structures. Well, CAS, LPAC, these large grain assessments, there's text in there, there's structure. We have to first teach our students how to navigate it, plus identify any accessibility tools that are going to assist our students on these to help make it more equitable when they sit in front of that computer. You start by just that simple exposure. Excellent. So I heard professional development, additional exposure. We're on the right track because that's exactly what came up in our medium grain data is, remember, we were in evidence-based strategies with that large grain, right? When we were looking at that large grain data, we went straight to evidence-based strategies. We got to do that. But as we got to that medium grain data, we moved over to the need for priority content. And what we found was that they needed to understand those math claims better, that they needed to use data-informed practices. Again, sharing that large grain data, having a quick conversation, and then heading back to their classroom and not using it to help drive their instruction. That was through the LPAC and CAS results. And then there needed to be some LPAC professional development. Teachers weren't familiar with it. And along with the LCAP, my brain's in DA, sorry, wrong acronym. Along with the LPAC, we also identified that the CASP itself needed additional professional development. Maybe not for our seasoned teachers that have been in CASP for a while and get into tools for teachers, but we noticed a pocket of teachers that didn't realize that exposure to the summative practice test, the interims that you can utilize, and tools for teachers, they needed additional professional development. So we're shifting, right? We had that large grain data was steering us down a certain path. And then we got a little bit deeper into that medium size and we went, wait, that's not exactly what we need. We're going to still use evidence-based strategies and work on that, but we knew we had to get into more of that priority content building. So we posed the question again, let's go a little deeper. What do you think? So we did. So we joined together before we move to that next section. What do you think is additional data that you could gather and analyze for next steps? So we looked at that large grain, the CASP. Then we went and we looked at the district level. What else now can you go look at? What's next? Talk for about a minute, 2 minutes. What do we think is the next data that we're going to gather? All right, anything from our people in Zoom land? Do they have any thoughts on what our next set of data is in the classroom? What about us in person? What are our next steps? What could we go and gather now? What are we thinking? Where are we heading? Student interviews. Absolutely. Thank you. What else? What's some other information that we are moving to now to go gather? What do we think? So we have student interviews. What else? What can we go gather?
Teacher leader committee, and how we run our committee is we do an activity, data activity, and then just an ELD activity with the committee, and then they go present it to their staffs. And so what we had them do at the beginning of the year was look at where all their EL kiddos fell overall, and then write a little action plan for their class and their kids. And then this last meeting, we had them drill down into each domain and have them write a new little action plan for now until March.
To get your information, love to come see that. Excellent. And we heard something there, an action plan. That's the important piece, because a lot of times we stop at the data gathering, have a little chat about it, and then we don't develop an action plan. Karen?
So Richard thought that he wanted to hear the voices of students and teachers next with some empathy interviews. And then also looking, another participant was talking about studying student test history and even looking into their CUMEs for additional data.
Excellent. Yeah, we can't forget that we have those cumulative folders, right, that have a lot of information. That's a data gold mine right there is what that is. So excellent. Thank you for sharing that in Zoomland, and thank you for those of us in person that shared. So we moved now. We're going to call it small grain. And we're going to give you the tools and the true terminology behind it in a minute. But our next steps were to go do that small grain data gathering. And we did that through focus groups of EL students and we were inquiring about their successes and challenges within mathematics. We used a tool then to do partner shadowing of our EL students. The teachers did, so now we're in the classrooms, we're with our students. And we identified minutes of participation. We did equity scanning, making sure how often they were involved in that mathematical discourse. And then we did those empathy interviews with our students. This piece isn't just that large grain data pushed out and easy to access. This takes time. This takes relationships, right, with our students to be able to get a deeper understanding of their environment and their reality that they are faced with every day in the classroom. So as we gathered this information, we had some findings. These findings were that the students didn't feel safe to speak in the classroom. They needed small group support from their counselors. They didn't think that they could learn mathematics, that it wasn't for them. We found that they did not feel their teachers cared for them and their needs. This wasn't all of the students, but there were some that this surfaced for. And through that equity scanning, we noticed during math class, less than 10% of instructional time did students get the opportunity to participate in the mathematical discourse. And parents seemed frustrated on how to help their students. The parents didn't feel included. So, now that we're in this small grain data, let's take a moment. What are potential supports or next steps would you take at your sites or classroom that you could propose for classroom ABC? We'll take about a minute and a half. Zoomies, drop it in the chat. What are some potential next steps? And we'll come back together in about a minute and a half for some share out. About 30 seconds. Karen, just let me know if anybody chimed in or, uh-oh. Maybe not uh-oh, that's data, that's good. All right, so as a team here in person, anyone like to share out as to what potential next steps are or suggestions for classroom ABC? Jackie just got voluntold, everyone. Here you go. And here's the microphone.
Okay, so obviously you have to change like the culture within your room so they feel comfortable speaking up. So a couple ways to do that is just the relationship building skills at the beginning. And I would probably do like a 10-minute mini lesson or something, and then I would switch over to small groups so that they're in a smaller setting and more comfortable to talk in, hopefully. And then yesterday we were in Doug Fisher's session and he talked about like these response cards so that they're color coded and they can answer like with not having to be verbal. But then if they want to be verbal, there are supports on the card that they can use to be verbal. So those would be like my next steps for trying to get that talk to happen in class.
Thank you so much. Karen, anybody online? We'll grab a comment or two and we'll share that out.
Sure, we had a suggestion for math literacy night to involve the families. Also suggestions for PD around equity of voice. And Structured, equitable talk protocols would also be their next steps.
Thank you. So I'll go back to, there's some professional development that needs to happen. Sometimes those strategies come naturally and our teachers are using them, right? We want to always stay asset-based. What do they already do that we can amplify that helps us? Who do you have on campus that does this, has maybe had PD or does it naturally, and they easily amplify student voices by their procedures and structures. We want to highlight that teacher or teachers on your campus so they can be seen and your teachers can learn from that. So thank you for all the share outs. And what we begin to see is as we went from that big grain down to the small, we started shifting in what the needs were of the students. Right? We said in our big grain data and medium grain data that we needed professional development around those evidence-based strategies, specifically math language routines. We needed to get some training in LPAC, but as we dug a little bit deeper and we mined deeper to that smaller grain data, something really popped up. And it was that our social emotional learning support and restorative practices needed to be a focus. Our students and teachers, we talked about parent engagement nights. They've done astronomy night since. They've done a couple others. We're looking at a STEAM night coming up. And then teacher strategies for growth mindset. And then again, those LPACs. So it changed. There's a big shift in the focus as we drilled down, right, into that small data. And in the beginning, with that large grain data, we're focused on those evidence-based strategies. And then as we got to the medium grain, it shifted to priority content. Doesn't mean we don't still need to focus on that. There should be a PDSA cycle in those arenas, but what really got highlighted in that small grain data was that we needed to focus on SEL, the social emotional learning, the emotional safety in the classroom. Maybe not for all, but for some. And again, we leaned on the assets of the teachers that did this well. And we saw with our students that they did feel more comfortable to speak out, and we began to use them as the tools on those sites for supports. So let's take a moment with this reflection question, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty learning. Now that you've heard our example with one of our sites, then we're going to now learn about the actual terms. But before we do, 2 questions. How did the additional data impact the supports and of the students and teachers? And then how did the focus of support shift with those various data points? Have you had a similar experience with this as well? Take about a minute. We're going to share this out and move to the next section. Karen, do we have any Zoomland comments? All right, headed your way. As in-person is wrapping up conversations.
One idea was that large grain data only might result in 2 broad solutions. Narrowing in could be impactful to get to the heart of the problem.
Love the terminology of the heart of the problem, because who are we serving? We're serving our students, right? Bottom line, that's who our focus is on. And wonderful. Thank you for dialing down the large grain data to the small grain. Any volunteers in person? What next steps are? Any more voluntold? All right. So now let's take a look at some satellite map and street data.
Thank you, Kristin. So now you've heard or seen data in action, looking at this site. But now let's talk about, where does this come from and what does this really mean? So when we're talking about data, we really need to talk about this street data, which is the piece we're going to end with today. Street data reminds us that what is measurable is not the same as what is valuable. We have a lot of data out there, but we really need to be able to measure what our students are doing in multiple ways, because not all pieces are going to be valuable. Not all those data points are going to impact what we're going to do until we really listen to the students who are at the center of this work that we've taken on. The work that we're bringing to you today comes out of this book by Shane Saphir and Jamila Dugan. Is anybody familiar with this book, Street Data? Oh, there we have it right there. It's an amazing book, and what this does is it really gives us the principles that we can apply to our work, but we want to make sure that we are using data at different levels to support all the decisions that we make in the schools with our students, for our students. Otherwise, we're just somebody with an opinion making a guess about things, right? We're not really there to do the work and service them in that way. So we have those 3 levels of data: satellite, map, and street data. These pieces, Kristin has already talked about this morning, but let's find out and dig a little bit deeper as to what these mean. Satellite data is the large grain data. It is the biggest piece of data that we see at all times, and this is going to give us a general focus of where we need to go, because it's going to illuminate patterns for us, where there's achievement, where there may be some equity gaps, what are the teacher qualities are, and some retention issues, whether within your programs, with teachers, with students. But this is where we start. This is way up here. We get these at the beginning of the year, our LPAC scores, our CASP scores. We start there to kind of give us where we want to go. Yeah, it's past. And typically this is where our school districts begin to make their decisions about what we're going to do, where we're going to go, because everything is here is what's reported to the public. So we are going to do a little bit of an inventory, though. As we go through each of these levels of data today, we are going to start to think about what is our largest grain of data that we have, that we already have in use at our site right now. So if we're talking about the largest grain of data, and we're going to see the examples again, we're talking CASP, ALPAC. We mentioned diagnostic assessments a little bit ago. Some of these types of data can fall into different categories based on their purpose. So for example, if we're talking a beginning of the year diagnostic for a student, that would fall here. But if we are repeating the diagnostic, as in programs like iReady does throughout the year, it becomes a progress monitoring, and that's going to fall into a different category. So right now I'm going to give you a minute or two to go ahead and think about what are my biggest pieces of data that we use to start our decision making at our district, at our site. Give me about 30 more seconds. Okay, we'll go ahead and bring it back. So as Kristin was mentioning in our scenario, we had our CASP data and our ALPAC data that was driving what the first analysis of what was needed at the school site. When we went through and did this inventory with our school sites, we were noticing, as we shared out in a large group, that there were some things that some school districts had in place and other things that other school districts did not have in place. But it kind of gave us this idea, the idea of what are some other things that they can pull in, but at the same time, what are some things that we can leave off of the plate? So just keep that in mind. We're not here to add additional work to you by having you pull all of these additional pieces of data. Each piece of data has a purpose. So we want to be able to filter through these pieces, these data points, and be able to put the things on the plate that we need to have on the plate to make this full meal, right? We cannot just pull in all data and say, we're going to use all this if it's not meeting our needs or meeting the purpose of it. So just keep that in mind, that it's not about layering on more pieces of data. It's about maybe being able to peel away some things. Maybe you have something in place that can serve multiple purposes and you can look at this in different perspectives. So putting the right things on the plate is what we're trying to do today, and not just add more things and have it overflowing like your Thanksgiving plate because you want to try everything. Anybody do that besides me? Got to take a bite of everything? Anybody want to share out what are some data points that you currently have that are your biggest piece of data that starts to put you in that right direction? California dashboard. Good old dashboard. Also a little bit behind. Just a little bit. Besides CASP, ALPAC, and dashboard, any other additional points, large grain data points? Okay, so those DIBELS M-class, so we'll speak a little bit more about that because depending on their usage and when they're administered, again, that's going to determine whether they're going to fall into our satellite map categories.
More for the SEL component, we do the California Healthy Kids Survey every year. So looking at that data, and we have our 4th through 8th graders do an LCAP survey every year as we're updating our LCAP. So we could look at some of that.
Thank you. So if those are ideas that you like, looking at the Healthy Kids Survey, getting feedback from students on the for LCAP purposes of the PFT, good old PFT. Anybody else have anything you would like to add? If you heard something in the room that you'd like to add to those additional pieces, so what are some additional satellite data sources that you can use to help inform your decisions? Think about what you heard and maybe what you can add to your placemat. As we move down and get a little bit closer from our bird's eye view, we are now going to look at map data. Map data is that medium-sized grain data. That was when Kristin was talking about looking at the interim assessments, whether ALPAC assessments or CASP interim assessments. Anything that you're going to use to monitor the progress of your students throughout the school year, that is going to fall into our map data, because this is where we're going to help us identify how are they doing in reading, how are they doing in math, but do they have any skill gaps? And earlier we talked about acceleration versus remediation. This is where we have to accelerate them. Where are they? Where are their gaps currently? And how am I going to get them to their grade level? What skills are they missing? But I need to make sure I'm using my current content. But we also need to talk about what are those instructional gaps that we have? What are the evidence-based strategies that may need to be implemented into our classroom based on this data? This begins to take us into a more focused approach. This is where we see district benchmark assessments as well. Looking at student report cards. How are they doing at the end of each quarter? Looking at the patterns over time. Somebody talked about looking at their patterns over time of assessment, looking at their testing history. Because this is, once we see these patterns, and if they're consistently struggling in the reading domain, what are we going to do for this student in reading? So this gives us a more generalized or more focused approach. If you think about how we go from the satellite, which is, way, way out there, and then we go into our map, we're getting a little bit closer to the ground here. Now we're going to see where we need to go. So in thinking about benchmarks, district benchmarks, your interim assessment practices, what does your testing schedule look like? This is where we are going to look at the map data. So what map data pieces do you currently have in place at your school that you are going to use to dig deeper into the needs of the school and the students? 2 minutes. I'll let you go for about 2 minutes as you bring this together. All right, let's just go ahead and shout it out. What are some map data points that you are currently able to pull and look at in your analysis? Are you ready? Yes, Karen out in Zoom. The STAR assessments. The RAND test. Who are not having growth in reading. So those are pieces that they pull in to kind of drill down a little bit closer, okay? Anybody use running records? BPSTs, Dibbles was talked about, Acadians. Now, keep in mind, we saw in our scenario that there was a plan in place for ALPAC interim assessments to be used, but they were not. So we also have to think about what data points am I missing that I may be able to get information from. And that's where we pull that additional data piece in, where they have it as part of their plan, but there's no data for them to collect because they're not being implemented. So the lack of data is also a telling story. So you need to keep that in mind, that it may be part of our plan and we may not have enough data points to gather that from. So we need to think about what is our system that we have to ensure that these pieces are being done so that we can collect these data points to inform our decisions.
And I just want to jump in really quick with something else that came up with this, and Veronica touched upon it. But as we were doing the map data inventory, the analysis, we began to have conversations around, okay, we give the iReady diagnostic, we do the STAR test. Now you're asking me for interims. You have district benchmarks that we take. When are we going to teach? But guess what? Before this process, it was all in conversation, right? The nagging around, we have too many assessments, we have too many assessments. There was no data that showed we had too many assessments until we began to put it on paper. So think too, as you had mentioned, what stuff do we need to get on the plate and what stuff do we need to remove from the plate? But this piece right here, this data inventory sheet, as simple as this placemat is, it's data. And it's a great tool to begin to have conversations around the over-assessing, right? and having a conversation of what can go. Are we holding on to it just because we're holding on to it? Are we giving the iReady diagnostic and the STAR diagnostic as well, and we can get similar information from it? But this is your data tool right here and your data collection of what can stay, what can go, and what maybe do you need to bring in.
And just to add to that, one of the other pieces that came out during that conversation is, yes, we give the assessment because we're told, but then the data is not visited. Like, what do we do with this data now that we have this? How is this going to inform our practices? So there was a mixture, a combination of teachers who dive deep into it, and there's some who are like, well, I don't even know what to do with this. I'm doing it because I was told. So again, choosing the assessment and which one you are going to have in place is going to be extremely important, because you need to know, how am I going to use these results? What am I going to use them for? Any additional map data pieces that you would like to add to your placemat, you can go ahead and do that. This is a great activity to take to your school site, work with your administrators so they can even see, what do we have in place? What do we need to maybe refine, revamp a little bit? Now, moving into the level 3. This is that street data. So if you keep thinking this visual, you're going from satellite to map, and now you're looking at Google Maps where you can see into people's backyards, see what kind of cars they have, and if their pet was outside on the day that picture was taken. This here is the finest grain of data. This piece, though, is going to really require you to have a focused listening and observation protocol, because it's all about listening to those who have boots on the ground. These are the teachers. These are the students. This here, this piece of data is going to inform and shape our next move, because it really helps us get a deeper understanding of the students, the staff, and even the parents who are experiencing this. This is their life, their experience. When we hear what they have to say, this is where we can start to help shift some mindsets, correct those misconceptions. But we don't know what they understand or don't understand completely until we listen to what they have to say. I practice this with my daughter at home. Sorry, Anna, I am not a math person. And when she asks me, Mom, can you help me with my math homework? Of course I can. What is it that you need help with? Problem number 3. Well, what do you know how to do? I don't know how to do any of it. Well, what do you know how to do from the last problem? Where are you stuck? What are you struggling with? Because I don't know what kind of help she needs until I know what she can or can't do. So when you listen to the voice of the student, of the teacher, and of the parent, this is where we really get to inform, what am I going to do? I am not going to go and sit and give my daughter a whole lesson on fractions when she doesn't need that whole lesson on fractions. She just needs to know, oh, I was supposed to simplify here. That's all she needed to do. That's where I needed to meet her. Street data does just that. Believe it or not, we have street data in place already. Do you do classroom observations? Do teachers conference with students? Are you setting goals with your students? Are you getting feedback to students? Are you listening to our parents taking surveys? Are parents showing up to your LCAP, ELAC, DLAC meetings? What do you have in place where you are listening to people with boots on the ground that are experiencing this? Go ahead and take that inventory. Believe it or not, we already have these in place, so don't be afraid to say, well, I'm not sure I do any of this. There are things in place that happen all the time, parent conferences. Go ahead and take a minute or two and write down, what kind of street data are you collecting? About 30 more seconds. What do you have currently in place in the form of collection of street data? Anybody in the room talk to students? A specific group of students or just any students?
We started 3 years ago. We developed a student senate team, and it really was more for LCAP purposes. And we do go out and meet with them in person once, kind of to help gear up the LCAP. But we do meet with them often online and talk about other non-LCAP things. And it's a lot of, how they feel, what do they want us to focus on. They're really concerned with the food choices and bathroom cleanliness. But we have actually put in some actionable kind of steps after hearing from them.
Right. And those pieces, as frivolous as they may sound, are things that we really shouldn't ignore, because when we're talking about that social emotional development, them having a safe place or feeling safe or having a sense of belonging, when those pieces are in place, when we have a solid relationship with our students, whether it be teacher to teacher or as a school as a whole, if they feel like they belong or they feel like they're being heard, you're going to get that reciprocated when they're going to feel safe, their minds are clear, and they're in that classroom seat and they're ready to learn. So we can't dismiss those pieces. As many times as I sat through a survey reading and I was like, oh, here we go. They don't like the lunch. Okay, well, what can we do to make the lunches better? And people were like, what are you talking about? Like, well, I like food. That's my passion someday, is to be a chef when I grow up. So it would be nice to have these kids feel like they're going to have a good meal, because if they are coming from a home where there is food scarcity, or they don't have the ability to be able to eat 3 meals a day, and they're going to get that good meal in your school at your site, then we give it to them. Anything else that we do? Earlier, in Kristin's scenario, we talked about empathy interviews. We go out and talking to students, having the classroom scan. How are students participating in the classroom by just tracking how many times they share out?
One really cool thing you can do is student shadows. So sit a day with a student and just see what their life experience is and collect observation data around that, which is really interesting, especially if you're working with a specific subgroup of students, just to see what their experience is like compared to a different subgroup.
And in the chat, we have Panorama. Yes. PBIS, the culture and climate surveys, all of those pieces that we're going to be able to hear from them as well. And you bring up a good point over here, is that we want to be able to, shadow them and make those observational pieces. We do that as teachers. When we see something's not working, what do we do in that moment? We adjust what we're doing. And that's an observation. That's something that we already have in place. So let's keep that in mind. We have things in place, but how are we capturing that? And when we talk about how we capture that, we'll go ahead and move into our next piece. But yesterday, Kevin Bracey said that every child needs at least one adult who is irrationally crazy about them. And when we listen to that child, not just the student, because they are a child first, they're a human being first before they're a student. If we let them know that we care, they're going, like we said, reciprocate that. We are going to get them, going way back to Maslow's hierarchy of those needs. If we can meet their basic needs and make them feel like they belong and feel safe, then the learning can take place. But how do we capture that? So what we have here is a tool that you can use to start to capture some of this data. I see a smile over here. You've seen this document. So this here, when we're talking about street data, though, when we really want to hit at those pieces that are our largest gaps in our system, we aren't just talking to all students, which is why I asked that question. Yes, every student, every child matters in our school, but our student groups that we see on our dashboard, we need to look at who are our marginalized students, who are the students who are being heard less from, who are the students on the edges that are just watching their education go by. These are the ones that we need to talk to. These are the ones that we want to focus on. And we do this by picking that group and having an inquiry question. So we talked about this morning how we need to have this as an inquiry base. We need to pose ourselves a self-reflective question to meet the needs of those marginalized students in our classroom. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to just give you some time to have a look at this document. It's a two-sided document. And then we'll just have a quick share out of what do you notice? What do you wonder? And then we'll talk a little bit how we use this tool. All right, let's go ahead and come back. What do we notice? What do we wonder? What are your thoughts on this tool here in front of you? Just as a preface, this is a tool. This is your planning document of how and what you are going to do in collection of street data. You'll see that there are 3 different categories that you can collect. That doesn't mean that this is an exhaustive list or this is an exhaustive example of what you can collect, but we can do this in 3 ways. We can collect stories, these narrative pieces, those interviews we talked about. We can collect artifacts, straight work from the students. That's very telling. If you can follow their pattern of what they're working on, what they're doing, and start to find out what they need support in, that student sample work is going to do. And then the observation, something we do on a daily basis, but there's different forms of observations. There's shadowing a student, there's the equity participation tracker, as well as using nonverbal cue maps that will allow us to gather information. So those are just some ways that you can gather data. And then you have your inquiry down at the bottom. Everything should be inquiry based. What is it that we wonder, and what questions are we going to ask in our interactions with the students? Now be very careful, because sometimes when you ask them questions, they can be very leading. So you want to make sure that as you are writing these questions, you don't say, what do you like? What's good? We ask those questions. And we found out, well, they're only talking about the good stuff. How do I know what's not good? How do I know what is challenging for them? So be very mindful of how you ask these questions, because they can be leading for students and adults as well. I've done this with adults as well. And then on the back side, we have our preparing for listening. These are the kind of the thinking it through. What are the conditions? When is the best time to have interviews? Is it going to be a Friday afternoon? Probably not. Is it going to be Monday morning? Probably not. Is it going to be on game day? Not at all, ever. Who is the person that's best positioned to listen to whom? We talked about those relationships, that SEL connection. If the student doesn't feel comfortable talking to me, I'm not going to go in and do an interview with that student. Those of you that are ALPAC test givers, you have those kindergarten students who first time taking this assessment and a stranger walks in to take them to take a test. I had a girl melt down on me. I don't like tests, because she thought it was something medically wrong with her. Took me 2 weeks to just go in and sit with her in a classroom before I pulled her for testing. Just hang out with her. And then how are we going to capture this data? I don't have my glasses on, so I hope I'm reading this properly. How are we going to capture this data? How are we going to record? Who is going to record? And what are we going to do with this? So this is why I'm doing the 40-year stretch here. Thanks for the offer of the glasses. I appreciate it. So this here is a tool. This is your planning document. This is for you and a team to sit down with and decide, how am I going to talk to my students? When, how, and the what behind it. Yes. That gave me a little bit of chills. You're going to hear, like, I did all these things. Yes, I worked in a very small school district. As an SST coordinator, never would have thought to have this kind of tool. Yes, we talked to students. Yes, I worked with them. But to really use this as a data point, very helpful. Thank you. So this is just a quick overview. We want to start at the very top with our satellite data and bring it down to our street level data as we get closer and closer. As it was said this morning, really know where is this starting? Where is this problem based? It's kind of like looking at that root cause analysis. What is it that this is stemming from? And let there be light. And these are just some synopsis on how we can gather those pieces of data that we've already talked about. That summative, the CAS, beginning of the year diagnostic for our satellite, our map, we have our district benchmarks, our chapter tests, quizzes, and then on our street level, we have home visits, shadowing the students, interviews, and that equity-focused classroom. For your perusal at a later time, there is a video here that was done in collaboration with ICOE and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And this is a video that goes over all the levels of data, but also talks about the focus on when we pull our LP data from the dashboard, our English Language Progress Indicator, is that it right? We tend to have a way of looking at things. And so this here was done with the Data Research Learning Network, and this video goes through and shows how we can take that lens, just like we did this morning of English learners, and what kind of data can be pulled at those different levels. So that video is there. It's a nice little infographic video with the voiceover. My voice, I just have to caveat, I was so nervous about playing the video in the room while I was in here, but just so you know, later when you go watch it, you'll get to hear me all over again. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it all over to Kristin.
Resource for you. And this resource is the 10 ways to collect street data. In our conversations that we have with school sites, we have data that's usually more readily available to us, like the CASP, interim assessments, diagnostics. Those are easy. What we don't necessarily know, or we're doing them and we don't call them a name, are these 10 ways to collect street data. So I'm going to give you the gift of time. I'll give you about 1 minute to skim and scan. There's a small gift. Small gift of time of skimming and scanning those 10 ways. And if you're like me, I want to read the whole thing, but that's why we gave it to you to walk away with. But skim and scan, what do you notice, wonder, which one do you want to try? And for those of us in person, we have tons of extras. So if you want to take them to take back to sites, we have extra copies. Plus the links are online. For those of you in Zoom land, if you find one that's interesting and you want to try, or maybe one that you've already tried, drop it in the chat. Give you about 30 more seconds. Again, just to skim and scan. All right, share in your groups, maybe one that stood out to you. Again, share with your groups or those on Zoom. You can drop it in the chat. Share with each other that way. Ooh, in person, we just gotta, I have an idea. All right, about 15 seconds. All right, team, wrap that up. And with that, we want to just review that we brought you a street data tool from that resource to move into more of that data mining at the street level data level. And we have your data inventory sheet that is a data collection tool in and of itself, which we need to get street data noted on that one document. Just FYI. And this all comes from Street Data. I'm sure you can purchase it on Amazon. We've done book studies with it. It is a great text to continue to build our data abilities and our data collection. And again, the focus on our students who are marginalized that need their voice heard. So these tools brought to you today. We're very grateful for you picking us to come and join us this morning. And yes. Prepare to listen tool.
Yeah. The Prepare to Listen tool is not something that we have invented. That tool comes directly from Shane Saphir that was shared during a COP that our county did participate in. So that tool is directly from her work. So this is taking that first step to begin the inquiry process. There's a whole cycle that comes with that, but this is that step one to the transformative cycle so that you can transform your practices at your sites and schools.
Thank you.
All right, so let's close this out for today. Stop, think, jot, share. We're going to have you either give us 3 takeaways that you have, maybe 2 questions, or 1 thing you'll implement next week. So take a moment, pick a number, or go completely rogue and choose 1 takeaway. All right, when it's natural, share it out with your group. Share it in the chat for our Zoom room. Any volunteers? What's 1 takeaway? What's 1 thing that you're going to implement? Here at the front, we said we're going to take maybe some of these forms and try them with our staff and see what that looks like. And with that, we love our feedback. We thank you very, very much. We appreciate your feedback. Please scan it or go to sccoe.to 2025 Summit. And again, myself and Veronica, we thank you very much on behalf of CCLA and Imperial County Office of Education. We hope today you were able to gain some new knowledge, apply it to what you know at your sites, identify some assets that you have, and you're able to take some stuff back to just continue to dig and serve our students as we pull that data up. And with that, again, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here this morning with us on Zoom. See you later. Lucky to be in your pajama pants, probably. All right. And with that, thank you so much.